Welcome back, everyone, to this interesting session today on identifying foreign keys for the case study online tutoring system, with the client being Code Plus Tutors. In the last video, we just identified the entities, attributes, and relationships. We also identified the primary keys. So, on the left hand side, the document that you could see is our updated document from that previous video. If you have not watched that video, I would strongly recommend you to go and watch the video on identifying entities, attributes, and relationships. And since we were discussing a lot in it, I thought of postponing our decision on identifying the foreign keys in this particular video. So, first of all, what are foreign keys? So, when you talk about foreign keys, they are used to explain the relationship between two entities or two tables. So, say for example, when you talk about the student and the payment here, the student and payment entities are related to each other through one-to-many relationship. So that is understandable to us when we go ahead and when we represent that in a diagrammatic form. But end of the day, this is going to get into our tables, and that relationship is going to be indicated in our tables as well. So how are we going to go with it? So say for example, when we take up the student entity and the payment entity. So one student can make n number of payments, but one payment will belong to only one student. So now we will have a student entity separately, and this student entity is going to have information such as student ID. I'm just listing all the attributes in another compartment associated with the student. So we have student ID, email, password, address, phone number, etc. Now, so end of the day, the student is going to become a table and these attributes are going to become the columns. Correct? Similarly, for payment also, we have a set of attributes that we have identified. That is fine. But how will this one to many relationship be established in your table design or in your entity? How is that achieved? That is where you have your primary keys and foreign keys useful. So we in the previous video we already went through the primary key. We know that the primary key is the unique not null column that uniquely identifies every single record in your table or entity, right? So now let us think about this one to many. So when you do that, we always play with the primary keys. So what we do is, in order to establish this relationship, we either put the primary key of student and the payment, or payment ID, the primary key of payment, as foreign key in student. So basically foreign key is the primary key of some other table is used as, okay, let me write it down so that it will be easy for you to follow. Primary key of one table or entity is used as foreign key in another table or entity to specify the relationship between them. Relationship between those tables. Is this clear to you? So this is foreign key all about. So once when you have primary keys or unique keys in your entities, those keys will move to the other tables. Rather than moving, those keys will be referenced in the other tables as foreign keys. So that's why the foreign key is also called as a referential integrity key as well. So now saying that, so primary key of one table is going to be used, or rather than used, I would say the best way to say that is referenced. So let me change it here. Is referenced as foreign key in another table or entity to specify the relationship. So now taking that into consideration, we know that student ID is the primary key of student and payment ID is the primary key of payment. Now, for this relationship, which key will go to which table? So that totally depends on what type of relationship we have. That is the interesting part of the conversation today. Let me explain to you. Based on the cardinality of the relationship, you will decide which entity's primary key will become the foreign key of another entity. Like, let us take up simple examples. Say, for example, we just spoke about the entity called a session and the entity called a payment, right? Okay, so do you remember what is the cardinality between those two entities? Is it one to one to many, or many to many? So one session will have only one payment and one payment will have only one session. So when it comes to 1:1 or 1-to-1 relationship, what we do is primary key of any entity can go to any other entity as foreign key. So, which means that when it comes from session to payment, since it is a 1:1 relationship, payment ID, the primary key, so let me just mark the primary keys here. So payment ID is going to be the primary key, and here it is going to be the session ID, correct? So now you can reference payment ID as foreign key in session table, or you can reference session ID as foreign key in the payment table. It could be either one of them. So if you remember, when we look at the entity called a session, the session along you have the session ID start date end date, but look at the payment. Do you see the session ID here? So this is because session ID is the foreign key that is being used in the payment table or payment entity. Instead, if you can just take off the session ID from the payment, and in the session table, you can go ahead and include payment ID as an attribute, and you can put payment ID as a foreign key here. Okay, but remember, you don't have to do both of them, then that is redundancy. You will do one of them. In our case, since they've given session ID as an attribute in the business rules, we are going to put session ID as the foreign key in the payment. Is this clear to you? Perfect. So now coming on to the second example, which is one-to-many relationship. So let us take up a one-to-many relationship. Okay, so between student and payment, we are having a one-to-many relationship. Correct? So let us draw that. So between student and payment, one student can make many payments, but one payment is associated with one student. So in this case, think about it. Will the student ID of student table go to payment, or payment ID will go to student? What do you think? Take couple of seconds, think about it, and tell me which one makes more sense. Did you come up with an answer? Okay, so let us think about it. If you put the payment ID as a foreign key in student, one student will have only one payment ID, is it? No, one student will have n number of payment IDs because it is a one-to-many relationship. So what happens is, if you put the payment ID as foreign key in student, then that column will have multiple values in it, which is not recommended. Instead, when you put the student ID in payment, so in a payment table for each record, how many student ID will be associated? Only one. So my data will be clean. So it is evident that when you have a one-to-many relationship, primary key on one side, which is the one side here, it is the student because that has the one. The primary key on one side will be referenced as foreign key on the N side. So the N side is payment. So you will take the primary key from one side, which is the student ID, and you are going to put that as foreign key in your payment table. So which means your payment table is going to contain the student ID as an attribute as well as the foreign key. So let us do that. So let us look at the payment table. So in the payment table, we are going to put the student ID, and to our surprise, they already gave that in our business rule as well. So the student ID will be the foreign key. And remember, this session ID is going to come from the session entity. The student ID will come from the student entity. So the restriction is only the session IDs listed in the session table. Only those values can be included as foreign keys. And whatever values you had in the student ID column in the student table, only those values can be used or referenced as student ID here in the payment table. Okay, so this is done. Now, let us go and see if we have any other one-to-many relationships. So, between student and payment, we have one-to-many relationship, but that does not cause any difference to your student table. So, there are no foreign keys as such as of now. Coming on to tutor. Tutor and session have one-to-many relationship. So, what does that mean? So tutor is going to be your one side, session is going to be your many side. So the one side primary key, which means your tutor ID, that will go to the session. Okay, so with that understanding, let us go to the session entity, and in the session entity, we will be introducing the attribute. What is it? We are talking about this relationship, right? So we will be putting the tutor ID as an attribute in the session, not just as an attribute, but also as a foreign key. Why do we do that? It is because you have a one-to-many relationship between tutor and session. So the tutor ID, which is the primary key of one side, will be referenced as foreign key in the session entity because that's the many side. That is why we include a tutor ID here in attributes and as well as in the foreign key. So that means that this one-to-many relationship is addressed already. So let us strike them off to make sure that we have addressed that relationship. We have addressed this one too. Okay, coming on to this one-to-many, this again is your many-to-many relationship breakdown. So we will come to it. And payment and session, they have a one-to-one relationship. So we said any of its primary key can be moved as a foreign key in other table. And we did that by moving session ID here as a foreign key. So we have covered this one too. Now, payment to student have many to one relationship. So, it is between your student and payment. Correct? So we have already dealt with it, and that is where we decided to move student ID as the foreign key here. Since we have already done it, we are going to strike that off as well. Okay. And then, so now the one that is left off is your many to many relationship, right? So let us talk about it. And if you remember in the previous video where we were talking about identifying entities, attributes, and relationships, I told you when you have a many to many relationship, it is better to break it down. So, and I told you I will give you the reasoning in this video, right? So let us talk about the many to many relationship. Let me quickly erase this white space so that we could use it as the whiteboard. Okay. Now, so which two entities participate in the many to many relationship? So it is going to be your student and the session, correct? So you have the student, you have the session, and between student and session, one student can participate in many sessions and one session can have many students. So now thinking about the primary key, student ID is the primary key of student and session ID will be the primary key of the session. Correct? Okay, now tell me students, will I put in this many to many relationship, what will we do? Will we put the student ID in session table or session ID in the student table? So if you put the student ID in the session table, then how many student IDs will my session contain? So one session will contain multiple students, which means the student ID will have multiple values in it. Correct? And we know that is not recommended. Okay, now let us try putting the session ID in the student table. One student can participate in many sessions, which means my session ID will also have multiple values in it. Yes or no? Then this is also wrong. Because when you have multiple values, it will affect your normalization very badly. So then what do we do? That is why we bring in a new table called as enrollment, or a new associative entity which will be transformed into a relationship table. So now what we do is we just break off this many to many relationship, and we will be creating relationship between student to enrollment and then enrollment to student. I mean the session. So one student can have multiple enrollments, but one enrollment will belong to only one student. And one session can have multiple enrollments, but one enrollment is only for one session. Now, what is the advantage of doing it? Since we break it into two one-to-many relationships, now the key on the one side will become the foreign key on the end side. So now enrollment will have student ID as the foreign key. Similarly, the primary key on the one side will be moved as foreign key in the end side, which means the session ID from your session will move as a foreign key here in enrollment. So just because if it is a many to many relationship, we cannot put each other's primary key as a foreign key to the other entity, we build in a new entity and we are moving the primary keys to both the primary keys will be moved as foreign keys here. Does it make sense? So this makes it clear to us. So when you have a many to many relationship, you cannot move the primary key of one side to the other. So you break down the relationship into two one to many relationship. Then what do we do? Reference primary key of which side? Right, one side. Primary key of one side as foreign key in N side. Is this clear to you? So now let us handle that in our document. So that is what is explained here. So student to enrollment is one to many relationship. So student is one side, and so student will not have any impact. So it will go to the enrollment. So when you go to the enrollment, already we have the student ID and session ID to be the composite primary key. They will be the foreign keys as well. Can the same columns or attributes be both foreign key and primary key in the same table? Yes, it can. So the student ID, the foreign key from student table, and session ID, the foreign key from session table or session entity, will together become a composite primary key in our associative entity or relationship table. Is that clear to you? So by doing that way, we are handling this relationship as well. So coming here, yeah, session and payment, the one-to-one relationship is handled. Your session to enrollment is handled. Session to tutor, we already handled it as well by bringing in the tutor ID here. So this means that we have addressed all the relationships that we have identified in the form of foreign keys. So now that we have come to an end, now whichever one, so student, it is a strong entity. Strong entity is one which doesn't rely on other entities. So this one has no foreign keys. So we can say not applicable or NA, or we can say no foreign keys. Okay, by doing this, we indicate that no foreign keys are present in the entity. Or we can just say no foreign keys, both are fine. Okay, so likewise, whichever entities, so even in tutor, we just need the tutor related information. We don't need any other foreign key. So we are saying no foreign keys are present here. Okay, and then coming on to session, and this striking off is just done for your reference. You don't have to do that in your assignments. Okay, so now coming on to this one, you have tutor ID as the foreign key. And then coming on to the payment, we have foreign keys. For enrollment, we have foreign keys. So in this video and in the previous video, I keep using the word strong entity. See, a strong entity is one which has a primary key for itself and it has a strong independent nature. A weak entity is one which cannot stand by itself and it needs support from the strong entities. Generally, our associative entity or the relationship table, say for example, your enrollment, it is identified as a weak entity because it cannot stand by itself. It needs the student ID from student and session ID from session to make you get formed as an entity by itself. So this enrollment entity, we can call it as a weak entity. Okay, so now we are towards the end of the video. To give you a recap of what we discussed in this video, we just started this video with the intention of identifying the foreign keys. So when we talk about foreign keys are the attributes or the primary key of a particular entity which is referenced as a foreign key in another entity in order to identify the relationship between those two entities. So if it is a one-to-one relationship, then primary key of any of the participating entity can go to the any other side. So that we discussed with session and payment, and we moved the session ID as foreign key to the payment table for that reason. Okay, and then coming on to the second one, which is a one-to-many relationship, the primary key of one side will be moved as foreign key to the many side. Say for example, when we have the payment to student, so student is the one side and payment is the many side. So the student ID is taken from the one side and placed as foreign key in your many side. And the third scenario is a many to many relationship. If you have a many to many relationship, you cannot place the primary key of one entity directly into another as foreign key, because it will end up with multiple values on that single attribute. To avoid that, we create an associative entity, and that entity will take the primary keys of both the strong entities, and we will make it as a composite primary key as well as foreign keys in your associative entity. That is what we did in the enrollment entity. I hope this is clear to you. So take up a case study for yourself and identify the entities, attributes, relationships, and most importantly, the primary keys and foreign keys. In the next video, in our case study continuation, we are going to draw the ER diagram. We are going to draw the entity relationship diagram by having this identified document as the base. So this document that we finally prepared, it is going to be the base for the next level base to draw the ER diagram. Okay. Okay then, so enjoy your day. I'll see you soon in it another interesting video that will help you through your learning process in database design. See you soon. Take care. Bye bye.